I hear you. We hear you.
I know I can't.
Enable the video.
You enable it?
Yeah.
Okay. We're good? All right. Okay, good work. Sorry, I'm a little delayed trying to arrange all the props. Okay, so we were discussing last week, again, if anybody has any questions, just post them on the chat, on this chat, and hopefully we'll be able to answer all the questions. Yeah, okay, so we were discussing last week Isurei D'Rabbanan, right? Which is that, meaning you can have Isurei D'Oraisa, which you say no cooking, no turning on fire. And then we know that you're allowed to, for electricity or anything like that, you're allowed to turn something on. You can plug in a refrigerator before Shabbos, turn on your lights before Shabbos, and there's no problem. But the Rabbanon put in restrictions by cooking. They put in 3 restrictions that they did not allow us to do certain things with cooking, even if it's done before Shabbos, because it might lead us to end up messing with the coals, mixing the fire, etc., etc. So last week we discussed shehiyah, which is that you're allowed to put up your food before Shabbos. However, you have to meet certain restrictions, or you don't have to meet the restrictions. You have to make sure you have to abide by certain restrictions, which is that according to Sfardim, really the food has to be fully cooked before Shabbos. According to Ashkenazim, half cooked or a third cooked, but preferably also fully cooked. But if you don't, then you could put on a blech, and once you use a blech, you can even put the food on raw right before Shabbos. I don't know if everybody here is used to cooking with a sous vide, however you want to pronounce it. We'll discuss it later tonight. Sous vide when it comes to shehiyah, when it comes to Hatamana. Okay, so that was basically what we discussed last week. Again, the simple eitzah is to make sure that you fully cook everything. If not, then as long as you use a blech, then you're okay. And we said that some opinions are that you don't even need a blech. A blech really covers the fire, but some are of the opinion that you could even just cover the knob, and that would be enough to prevent it. It's better to do both cover the knob and to cover the fire, and then you'll be fine, according to all opinions. Okay, tonight we're going to discuss what we call Hatamana. That's the second. So again, the first one is shehiyah. Again, all gezerah d'Rabbanans. And when we have with gezerah d'Rabbanans, so sometimes you have things that may not necessarily make sense for us, to our brains, and that's because when the Rabbanan make gezerahs, they also have the right, since they're the ones that made the gezerah. So there they can also, not we, but they can also adjust their gezerah to whatever it is that's necessary. So it may not make sense to us, but again, it's based on what the Chachamim were afraid was going to happen, right? So okay, so the first one was shehiyah, leaving the food on from before Shabbos, and the second one is called Hatamana, which means insulating. Okay, the way it worked back then is that you wanted to insulate your food so that you have hot food on Shabbos. I think we mentioned this last week too, but it's actually brought in Shulchan Aruch in the section on Hatamana. It actually talks about the mitzvah to have hot food on Shabbos, and it means specifically Shabbos morning, because it's no big deal to have hot food Friday night. You just keep the food on a fire Friday afternoon, and then you can eat and then you shut off the fire right before Shabbos, and then you can eat hot food. Right, but Shabbos morning it requires some sort of work in order to make sure your food stays hot. So we are spoiled, and we have our ovens, hot plates, etc., etc. Not way back in the Gemara's times, they really didn't have a way to do this. Now, we said that the Tzedukim, because it says the pasuk, they only went to Tzedukah were the ones that only went with the Torah. Whatever the Torah says, that's what they did. They did not give any credence to anything that the Rabbanon say. So since they were of the opinion that it says, there should be no fire burning. So they said anything to do with fire is not allowed on Shabbos. Nothing to do with warming up, etc., nothing. No fire on Shabbos. So according to them, there's no way to have hot food on Shabbos morning because they didn't allow anything having to do with coals. We hold that you can do it as long as you do it properly lahalacha. So therefore, by us eating hot foods on Shabbos morning specifically, again, not in Shabbos morning, Shabbos afternoon, we're showing that we disagree with that and that we hold that you are allowed to eat, you are allowed to use fire on Shabbos, obviously as long as the fire was made before Shabbos and as long as it meets the requirements. So that's why there is a chiyuv to eat hot foods on Shabbos morning. It doesn't have to necessarily be cholent, right? But it should be something hot. Okay, so what is Hatamana? So basically, one of the ways that they kept food hot back then was they insulated their food with different forms of insulation. So the Mishnah goes through all different types of insulation with wet sand and dry sand and grass, wet grass, dry grass, all these different things that they figured out scientifically should be what's going to make it more insulated, what's not going to make it more insulated. So the Chachamim were afraid, though, that if you're going to make sure you're going to have hot food on Shabbos, and then you come and you notice that your insulation is messed up, and therefore the food is never going to be hot by come Shabbos morning, then they're afraid that you're going to take coals and mess around with it. Like we said, again, we're not worried, the Chacham were not worried that somebody's purposely going to go against the Torah. They were afraid that absentmindedly, because of the importance of having hot food and because the importance of having a good Shabbos meal, and we're just going to lose ourselves and say, oh, I better make sure this thing is hot, and then start mixing the coals and move some coals over, etc., etc. So they were afraid that you might forget yourself. So therefore, they put in certain restrictions how you can go about insulating your food. So again, nowadays, there are going to be quite a few examples that nowadays it applies also, but most of the scenarios that are in Shulchan Aruch don't really apply nowadays because we have a much easier time keeping foods hot on a hot plate, crock pot, but we're going to discuss that a crock pot is really not necessarily so simple according to halacha. Okay, so basically that's what it is. It's called Hatamana. The translation means insulating, and there's two different types. There's Hatamana before Shabbos and Hatamana after Shabbos starts, meaning you can theoretically insulate something before Shabbos, and you can theoretically insulate something on Shabbos. So before Shabbos, let's start with before Shabbos, because that's more simple. Before Shabbos, you're allowed to insulate whatever you want. However, and this is the major rule, that you can only insulate with something that will maintain heat, not with something that's going to add heat. Okay? So again, if you're going to maintain, if what you're doing is going to maintain the heat level, then you're allowed to use whatever it is that you want from before Shabbos. If it's going to raise the temperature level of the food, then that's not allowed even before Shabbos, even though you're going to say, what's wrong with doing it before Shabbos? Like we said, we're afraid that if it's something that's going to add heat, then we're afraid you're going to mess with it if you see it if you see that something went wrong with your insulation. So therefore they were afraid you're gonna have this problem. So before Shabbos, you're allowed to insulate with whatever you want as long as it's going to maintain heat, not add heat. A simple example is, let's say you want to take your soup. And I know in Eretz Yisrael people do this. I don't know in America if they do it so much. I think in Eretz Yisrael they have smaller apartments. You leave a flame on, it makes the apartment very hot in the summer especially, and people don't want to leave the flame on. So what they do is they take the soup and they shut it off right before Shabbos, and then they'll take the soup and wrap it up in towels and or blankets, and that will stay hot for the next hour or two till it comes time to have the soup. So can you do that before Shabbos? The answer is yes, you can, because the blankets are not going to add temperature. Let's say you take the soup off the fire and it's 200 degrees. when you wrap it in towels, it's not going to make that temperature go up. Hopefully what it'll do, obviously depending on the thickness of your blankets, et cetera, and how warm the room is, but what it's going to do is it's going to at least hold that temperature or prevent it from dropping a lot. Right? That's what you do. But can you take an a heated blanket and wrap the soup in a heated blanket? Right? Keep the heated blanket plugged in, and you want to wrap the soup in the heated blanket, which could very well, again, obviously depending on the heat of the soup and the heat and the level of heat in the soup and the level of heat on the blanket, will that cause the soup to get even hotter? Which there's a very serious concern that may be. So therefore, you would not be able to put a soup, even on Friday afternoon, in a heated blanket. In a non-heated blanket, 100%, no problem. Okay? Fine. So that's the first. That's called Hatamana, with something that doesn't add heat. So that's mutter before Shabbos. On Shabbos, it's not allowed. Okay? Again, but if you tune out now, you're not going to end up with the leniencies. We're just doing the basic halacha, and then we're going to go through, like we said, the Rabbanan have the wherewithal, since they're the ones that made up the halacha. They have the wherewithal to limit the applications of the halacha. So if you tune out now, then you're not going to hear the leniencies. We're going with the basic halacha, and then we're going to discuss the leniencies. So again, before Shabbos, you are allowed to put, you're allowed to insulate whatever you want, but it can be only with something that's not going to add heat. If it adds heat, then it's also even before Shabbos. Okay, on Shabbos, you are not allowed to insulate even with something that's going to just maintain the heat. So for example, you serve the soup on a Friday night, and then you decide, hey, maybe somebody's going to want soup later, or how are we going to keep it hot? So okay, why not? If I can before Shabbos wrap it in a blanket, so why can't I wrap it in a blanket on Shabbos? I'm not doing any cooking. I'm not doing any insulating that's adding heat. So why can't I do that on Shabbos? The answer is you are not allowed to do it on Shabbos, because they were afraid if we're going to allow you to insulate from the get-go, meaning to do an initial insulation on Shabbos, then they were afraid that it's not going to work, and then you might end up wanting to warm it up a certain way, and it's going to become a problem. So insulating on Shabbos with something that's going to maintain heat is not allowed. Before Shabbos, yes. On Shabbos, no. Okay, and this is going without we're going to go when we get to the leniencies in a few minutes, Bez Hashem. Right, so again, on Shabbos, you cannot take the soup off the stovetop and wrap it in blankets, or even wrap a towel around it, because that's called insulation on Shabbos, and that's not allowed to be done. Okay? That's that. Now, there's another din, which is, let's say you do insulation with something that's going to add heat. So as we just mentioned, something adding heat is not allowed even before Shabbos. So taking a heated blanket is not allowed before Shabbos, and even into Shabbos itself, you would have to remove whatever it is. If you by mistake did this, then you have a problem, and you're going to have to remove it. Whether it makes the food usher is probably will not make the food usher if you by mistake did do Hatamana, the insulation, with something that adds heat. Okay, now something we're going to see soon is, how do you define adding heat? So we used an example of an electric blanket. That's definitely adding heat. What happens if the thing itself does not add heat, but when you combine the towel with another heat source, then it's going to add heat? For example, you take the soup is on a fire, on a blech, let's say, and you want it to stay hot. So you say, 1 second, why can't I just wrap it in a towel? The towel doesn't add heat, right? So why can't I do that? But meaning even before Shabbos. Obviously on Shabbos, you're not allowed to do that, like we discussed. But before Shabbos, why can't I wrap a towel around my soup on a blech or on a hot plate? Now, I'm not talking about safety. Safety, it could be that's a little bit of a disaster for safety. But assuming la halacha, can I do that? The answer is no, you cannot, because even though the towel is not going to add on heat by itself, but since it's on top of something that's providing heat, when you combine a hot plate and a blech together with a towel, that is going to add heat. So therefore, that's considered adding heat, and you're not allowed to wrap that even before Shabbos. On Shabbos for sure, and even before Shabbos, you would not be allowed to wrap it on top of a heat source, which we're going to see. That's part of the problems with a crock pot, right, or an urn, right? Okay, so now those are the basic halachas of Hatamana. Now we're going to discuss exactly how you I don't want to say get around Hatamana, but basically what it is that you have to meet in order to have the restriction of Hatamana, you have to meet four criteria. If you don't have all four, then it's not a problem of Hatamana, meaning it's only a problem if you have all four criteria met. If you're even missing one, it's not a problem of Hatamana, and you can do whatever it is that you need to do. Okay, so the first one is that the pot has to be completely covered. Okay, if the pot is not completely covered, then it's not considered Hatamana. Okay, meaning if you leave a considerable space where the pot is not covered, then it's no problem. Okay, for example, so people always ask, well, exactly how much room do I have to leave on the pot that it should be uncovered for it to be a problem? The answer is that if you would look at this thing and say, this will never keep the food hot, meaning I would never lechatchila keep food hot this way, then that's called it's not fully covered. If you look at it and you say, oh, that'll keep the heat pretty good, then that's already too much. I know it's being a little vague because every pot is different, the sizes of pots are different, the way towels drape on it are different, so it's a little bit vague, but that's basically what it is. So the simple way around this would be, so I just noticed one question, which, yes, a pot cover is not considered insulating. It's a common question. People say, well, why isn't the pot itself insulating? The initial pot itself, which we'll get to in a couple of minutes, is not considered insulation. Anything that's in a pot that's meant to cook, that's the way you cook it. Otherwise, there's no way to cook. So a pot and a pot cover is not considered insulation, and we'll get back to that. We'll get back to that soon. Okay, so now just using a mushel, I don't know if anybody could see. So using this Gatorade bottle as an example, let's say this was a hot pot, and I want to insulate it on Shabbos, right? Or if it's before Shabbos and it's on a heat source, or it's on Shabbos and it's not on a heat source, right? So then if I take this towel and I would put it over it, so now this would be okay. This would be okay because I left open this whole area, right? Or even if I put it totally around it from the top, I hope everybody could see, but if I leave the bottom open, can you see it? If you leave the bottom open a little bit, then it's also going to be okay because nobody would say, oh, this is the way somebody is going to properly insulate something, right? So that's basically what it is. You got to leave part of it open, and then you'd be okay doing that type of insulation. Okay, so that's the first leniency. Okay, second leniency is that it has to be in the pot that it was initially cooked in, what we called last week, 2 weeks ago, kli rishon. It's only if it's in a kli rishon. If you transfer the food to a kli sheni, then you are allowed to do hatamana in that. You're allowed to insulate into a kli sheni, right? So basically, if you decided Friday night you have the soup and you wanted to keep the soup hotter for later, right? Now again, this is assuming that you don't have a blech and you can't do chazor, which Bez Hashem we'll discuss next week, but you want to keep it hot. So there's a very simple eitzah. Either you can do what we said with the towel, drape it, but don't leave part of it open. Or if you want to fully cover it, what you do is you take it from the soup pot, you put it into, let's say, a plastic, what do you call those things? Like a plastic, a 2 gallon or 1 gallon, I guess whatever size that you want, right? And you put it into 16 ounce or whatever it is pound, and you then once it's in a klisheni, then you are allowed to wrap it and put it wherever you want. You can wrap it, and hopefully it'll maintain its heat that way. And the reason for that heter is because once you've transferred it to a klisheni, now you've already given up in your head that this thing is ever going to be hot. We know that once you transfer things to a second kli, you've already given up on it being boiling hot. So if the insulation is not working, well, we're not afraid that you're going to go get coals and do that. So therefore, once you put into a klisheni, then you're allowed to do full insulation wherever you want. Okay, that's the second one. So far we have one, that it's not fully covered, and two is that it has to be in the original pot. If you transfer it into a different pot, then you're allowed to. Okay, the third heter. Well, then let's look. The third heter is that the insulation has to be up directly against the pot. If there's a space, even the smallest amount of space in between the pot and what you're insulating it with, then that's going to be okay, and then it's no problem about Hatamana. So, for example, using this Gatorade bottle again, if I wrap it, but somehow I make it that the towel is not right. See, right now, the proper way to do it, and this would be the best way to insulate, is if I take the towel and I wrap it tightly up against the bottle, and that will hopefully maintain the heat, right? But what happens if I leave a little bit of a space? See, now, when you put it like that, there is a space in between. It's hard to see. Well, I have a different common example that this applies to, right? So then if it doesn't go directly up against the pot, then it could be fully covered also, and it's no problem. Okay, so that's the third leniency. The most common example of that is, and again, I don't know how much this applies nowadays, but I know in the old days people used to do this. I think our urns are a lot better than they were in the old days. But in the old days, people that wanted hot water, really hot water. So the urns didn't keep it so hot. So what they would do is they would take the good old paper bags, which are coming in style again now because of this whole plastic bag ban. But the paper bags, what they would do is they would put the paper bag over the urn. And therefore, that would add more heat. Now, if you put that paper bag right up against the wall, and that paper bag goes all the way down to the bottom of the urn, right? Then you have a problem because it's considered adding heat. So even if you do it before Shabbos, it's a problem because since it's on the heat source, right? Because the urn is giving off fire, and it's up against the walls of the urn, and the urn is fully covered. Therefore, you have a problem and it's in the kli rishon, it's in the initial kli. Then you have a problem of Hatamana, and you would not be allowed to do this paper bag and put it over the urn. It's interesting because I think somebody invented a special Shabbos blanket or cover to put over the urns, and it said L'Kavod Shabbos. To me, I don't understand how that could be L'Kavod Shabbos. It could be L'Chilul Shabbos if it was not done correctly. Meaning, if somebody knows how to do it properly, then it could work. But if not, then it could be a problem, right? So that's the story with the urn. So let me try and pick up. I brought an urn and see if anybody could see it, right? So basically, let me try and pull this back. Sorry. Okay, so now you have an urn, okay, and so what you would do is you take a paper bag. Sorry. I don't know what people are used to doing. If you take the paper bag and put it over the urn, it's going to make it a little too close. Basically, this is the urn, and you cover it fully with a paper bag. This is going to be a problem because it's fully covered and it's going to make it hotter. But this actually has an advantage because if you look under there, this paper bag is giving at least a couple of inches space in between the walls and the urn itself. So therefore, this would be a mutter way to do this, right? Because again, the space. See the space there. Another alternative is that you don't have to put it all the way down. You can put it most of the way down, and then you're going to be okay with that too, right? And this also applies. I hope this is being clear, but this applies also to when you put foods on top of a crock pot in order to warm them up, right? Okay, so fine. I hope that was clear. Now, if you're going to take, I'm going to come here and hold this. Can you hold it? Just on that. Hello. Go back. Back a little bit. Okay, so I thought I brought up some pans, but if you take on a crock, and then many people, what they'll do is then they'll take a towel, cover it if they want it to give heat. So now it's a problem because here, if there's we'll use our good old Gatorade bottle. So you put a Gatorade bottle here to warm up. Now you put a towel on top because you want it to give more heat, right? This is a problem even before Shabbos because the crock pot's giving heat and the towel is going right on top of the food. So now you have a problem because that's insulating with something that's adding heat. So this is an issue. So an eitzah to do would be is if you want to make sure that it drapes, what you would do is let's say you put your foods here. Let's say you put your foods around the crock pot. Then what you do is take, let's say, a cookie sheet, which I should have brought it up, a cookie sheet, and put it across the top, and then put the towel. And that cookie sheet, since it's wider than all the food, that will make sure that there's going to be a space in between your towel and the food, and then you're going to be okay, right? Then you could do that. You could do that in order to make it more to make it hotter, but making it with halachic according to the halachic guidelines. Okay, I hope that's a little clear. If not, I'll answer questions after. Okay, so that's that practical application, and then the fourth kula, which is also very important, is the reason why you want to insulate it. This is the fourth, not the kula. This is the fourth requirement. You have to want to insulate it because you want the heat. The reason why you want the insulation. The reason why you're insulating is because you want the heat. But let's say you're insulating it not because you want the heat, but because, let's say you don't want somebody seeing, right? You know, you always have people come into the kitchen, they see stuff warming up, they say, "Oh, let me take a taste," right? And you don't want anybody taking a taste. So what you do is you cover with a towel. If that's the case and they're like this, they don't know what's under there. That would be okay, even though it's doing the same. It's not an easy concept to understand. You're doing the same exact thing. You're doing insulation, you're covering it, but the reason why you're covering it is not because you want it to be insulated. You're covering it because you don't want people to see what you're warming up and then they help themselves before the meal. So that would be okay. Same thing if the reason why you're covering food is because you don't want bugs to get into it or whatever it is, then that would be okay. All right. Now, I'm not sure what everybody on this shiur would say about when you want to warm up challah on top of the crock pot and you put it in foil. Okay, I'm not sure. I once gave a shiur, but it was to men, so I don't trust them at all. But why do you put the foil around the bread? If it's there because you want it to get hotter, then that's a problem, right? Because the reason why you're putting the foil around it is because you want it to get hotter. If you're just doing it because you don't want it to get crispy or soggy, again, I'm not usually in the kitchen, so I don't know exactly how it would work. But if that's why you want to do it, then it would not be a problem. So again, it's all totally in intent. right? Depending on what your intention is, that's whether it's going to be allowed. So again, the 4 are, the pot has to be completely covered. You leave a space open, it's okay. The food has to be in the original pot, and if you move it to a second pot, it's no problem. The third is that it has to, the third, what we did, I did it in a different order, right? The third, what did I say the third one was? Oh, that it has to be up against the pot. And the fourth one is that you have to have the intent to insulate it as opposed to not having the intent to insulate it. Okay, which we'll get back to that. We'll get back to that soon. Yeah. Okay. So now, let me just look through some questions now before we continue, because I see a lot of questions being posted. Okay. I'm going to start with the ones that are on the actual Hatamana. I don't know if the fellow that normally monitors said he had to leave a little early. So I see, I'm not sure if if you're there, did you post everything that's supposed to be? No, Hatamana that adds heat is not allowed in the Kli Shlishi. Okay. A Kli Sheni would be allowed if it is a Davar Gush. That's an excellent question. But you would be allowed to do that if a Davar Gush. Putting a hot drink into a thermos is okay also, because since it's already into a Kli Sheni, then it's no problem, right? That's what the poskim say. Somebody had asked if eating hot food is a chiyuv or a minig. It's borderline chiyuv. Right? It's a borderline chiyuv. So that's it's hard to say that it's mamish chiyuv, but it's strong. I mean, the Shulchan Aruch brings it. It's not like a minig, etc., but the Shulchan Aruch brings it. So it really is something that, okay, if you don't have chon, you could have a hot tea or something like that. Covering in the summer to prevent room from getting hot that's a good question. I don't know how that's going to work, but if it's really not because you want to maintain the heat of the food, then yeah, I don't see no problem. I see no problem with that. And then the first one was, can you put hot poppers on a radiator heater if it will reach Yad Saletis? No, the poppers, yes. The sauce, no. If sauce is going to get higher than 110, then that's an issue having nothing to do with chazara. We'll discuss this again Bez Hashem next week, but that has nothing to do with chazara. There's an isser to take sauce and reheat it to higher than 110, no matter how you do it. It's a concern that you might have cooked it. So therefore, the best eitzah to do is to try and keep that sauce overnight next to a crock pot. As long as that sauce is warmer than room temperature overnight, then you would be able to put it onto a radiator to get it over 110, right? Okay, why is a blanket not allowed if bottom of pot is not covered with the towel? It would be allowed, and then if the bottom of the pot is not covered, you leave a space open, then you would be allowed to use a blanket over it, as long as you're leaving a considerable space, or you put a space in between, then that would be allowed, right? Okay, that's I'm not sure what that means. Bottom meaning under. Is that a question? A bottom? I'm not sure what that means. I mean, why? What? No, under the pot is considered insulated because it's on top. We're assuming that the pot is on top of some heat. Since the pot is on top of heat, then that's considered for sure wrapped, right? So then this is in addition to that. But that we're going to get to. We're going to get to that right now because that's one of the big issues with the crock pot. Okay, so continue to post the questions and we'll hopefully get to it. Yeah. Okay. So now, let's do some of the common applications of this. Can you take so we're going to discuss the tinfoil balls. So based on this, can you take food and wrap it in aluminum foil and put it down on top of the crock pot? Right? So now really that should be okay, because we said that the initial pot, the pot that the food is in, is not called insulation, right? So foil, if your food is in foil, like a kugel or anything like that, that's considered its pot. So you'd be able to put it on there. However, the place can say that that's if you put one layer. If you put more than one layer, now you're already making it into a second pot. Okay, so therefore that's an issue. Okay, so again, if you have your initial food that's you take a kugel out of the fridge and you want to put it down on top of the crock pot, no problem. Put it in foil. It's okay, because that's the initial pot. That's essentially taking the place of the pot. See, challah maybe is a little different, because challah doesn't need a pot. Right? So when you're wrapping it in foil, it would depend why you're wrapping it in foil, to put it down on top of the crock pot. But kugel and anything like that, that's considered the initial pot, and therefore they would be allowed. What about kishka or kugel in the cholent from before Shabbos? Or eggs. Many people put eggs. Many people put kishka or kugel in a foil. So is that called insulating? So most poskim say that it's not considered insulating, because why are you putting the kugel in a foil? I would imagine most people would answer the reason why you're putting the kugel in the foil is because if you don't put it in the foil, it's going to disintegrate and you're not going to have a kugel you're not going to have kugel anymore. It's just going to get mixed in. Therefore, that's not for insulation purposes. That's for the pot, and also, like we said, it's the initial pot. So since it's the initial pot, then that would be okay. Others say no, you shouldn't do that. So what do? You should poke a few holes in the foil, and what does that accomplish? That makes it that it's considered part of the cholent. It's not, meaning, why is it not insulating to take a piece of meat or a potato and put it into the cholent, right? You're taking that potato and it's being insulated by cholent that's inside a pot, and it's adding heat. So why are you allowed to put potatoes in cholent? Why are you allowed to put anything in cholent? The answer is because if that's the way you cook it, that's not called intention to insulate. That's just the way you cook, right? So those that say that you would not be able to put the kugel into a foil because that's considered like insulation, so then what you do is you poke a few holes, and then that makes it as part of the cholent, and therefore it's okay. But the psak, the accepted psak, is that you can take kugel, kishka, eggs, whatever it is, and wrap it up, and then it's considered the initial pot, and therefore it's you're allowed to put it in. If you're doing it, but again, if you do multiple layers, then that's a problem. Multiple layers is more of a problem, because why are you doing multiple layers? To try and keep the heat in, unless again you have an excuse. Why are you doing multiple layers? Okay, so now an interesting question that comes up. I don't know, for some reason I think men are more into sous vide or sous vide, whatever you want to call it, than women, right? But now basically, for those that don't know what sous vide is, and I don't have a sous vide, but these are the things you have to learn when people start asking about it. So basically, it's you take a pot of water, and then you put in this wand that keeps the temperature steady at about 150, 200 degrees, and you put meat in a shrink-wrapped plastic, and you leave the meat in there, or salmon, or whatever it is that you want, and it cooks the food. It takes, I don't know, 12 hours, 18 hours, 24 hours, whatever it is, and you leave it in there, and then you want to and then you take it out on Shabbos. The question is that mutter, because essentially what you're doing is you're insulating it inside a bucket of water. So now if you say, like we said about the foil, so then it's part of that. We said that putting it's the initial pot, so therefore it's okay. So this too, it's in the initial pot, right? The problem is that by a cholent, it's part of the kugel becomes part of the cholent. Here, you're not saying the water that it's cooking in is it's considered a total separate entity than what you're trying to cook. So there are different shittas. Some say it's the same as putting the kugel in a foil into the cholent, and some say that it's not, and it's also Rav Heinemann from the Star case says you're not allowed to do it. It's considered insulating. The OU seems to say that it's mutter because it's no different than putting it into the pot. It's best really to stay away from it on Shabbos. Besides that, there's a shahiyah issue because people put it in raw right before Shabbos. So maybe you need a blech. Maybe you put it up raw right before Shabbos. Maybe that would work. But there's another issue is that these wands are very sensitive. And when the temperature changes in the pot, then that will cause the wand to adjust the temperature, and then it'll have all sorts of digital readings. So if you take out the meat on Shabbos, so then it could very well be that will change the temperature. So basically, you got to tread lightly when using a sous vide on Shabbos. On Yom Tov, it would be much more mutter. Hope I'm being a little clear. It's a little vague exactly what the story is with the sous vide. Okay, so that's that. Fine. Now, what is the controversy with the crock pots? Okay, so now we'll try and explain with the balls and lining it with foil. So basically, here we have a crock pot. Hope everybody can see. I mean, you don't really need to see a crock. I imagine everybody knows what a crock pot is. Right now, a crock pot has got heating elements here, around the bottom, right, and around the sides. The only thing that it's missing is there's nothing on top. Okay, right? That's your classic crock pot. We'll get back to that in a minute. All right, so now the question is that called insulating with something that adds heat? Right? Like we said, insulating with something that adds heat before Shabbos is a problem. This definitely adds heat a whole Shabbos, otherwise you wouldn't have cholent, right? So what's the heter to do this? Okay, so Rav Moshe Feinstein was quoted as saying it's not an issue. Why not? Because the top is not covered, right? Again, the pot cover doesn't count. The pot cover is considered part of the initial pot. That's the pot that you normally cook in, and that's the regular way of cooking. So therefore, the pot cover is not an issue. So the top is totally open. How could you? We said that one of the 4 requirements is that it has to be fully enveloped. If it's not fully enveloped, then it's not a problem. So the top is totally open, right? That seems to take care of the whole issue. However, many poskim say that the top does not count. From the sides and from the bottom, then the top doesn't count, and therefore you have a problem with Hatamana. Okay, fine. So again, if you go with what they say, and it's not this issue with this. So if you go with what they say, then it's a problem, right? I'm sorry, according to Rav Moshe, it's not a problem because the top is open and it's fine. If you go with the other opinions that say that the top doesn't matter, then you have a problem. Okay, so now let's try and go through what would be the heterim. Okay, so if you take out the crock pot and you look inside, the question is, how big a space is there between, I don't know if you can see, right? If you have, is a space between of the and the walls, there is an area without a doubt. The question is it very, very small, substantial, and not substantial enough? Or do we say, no, a space is a space? From what I see, the space is it really goes right up against the wall. So that would not be a heter. That would not be a heter in order to allow it for that reason, right? So the question is, if that's the case, then you're not allowed to use a crock pot on Shabbos. So what many Rabbonim have said to do, and this takes care of the issue, is you take out the crock pot. You take out the crock pot, right? And then you take some tinfoil balls or rocks or whatever it is, right? And what you do is you put it into the bottom of the crock pot, and then you put in the insert. And then what it does it raises it, and it doesn't have to raise it a lot. It raises it slightly from the bottom, and then there's airspace around your crock pot, and that takes care of it according to all opinions. Which I can't say that I always do that. Sometimes I do it, sometimes I don't. Depending on every time I learn learn it over again, I sometimes will decide that way. Not that I really decide anything on my own, but I'll go with the opinions that say this way, they say that way. But the point is, there's plenty what to rely on, that you don't need to do anything. But if you don't want to have this shaila, so then what you do is you put the balls inside there, it raises it up ever so slightly, and then you're okay. Now, if this is really for next week, Bez Hashem, but if you want to make a blech, so that's not going to work for a blech. Meaning, let's say you want to take cholent out Friday night and then put it back. Those balls are not going to work as a blech. You'd also have to line the interior of the heating element with tin foil. So you need really do both things. You need to do ball and you need to do the lining. Although I saw a check today, the Lamates Malachas from Rabbi which is an excellent sefer, says that just lining it with tin foil will also take care of that issue. I think many Rabbanim don't go with that. They say you actually have to put in the balls in order to lift it up, and then that would take care of the issue. So that's basically the issue with the crock pot. Again, if you're eating at somebody's house and they don't put the balls in the crock pot, it's no problem. If you haven't done it till now, it's also not a problem. If you choose to try, you want to be yaitza all the opinions, and you want to start adding the balls to the pot, then that would be okay. One more thing, actually two more things. Warming up a baby's bottle, right? Putting it into hot water. So that's more of an issue because you're taking something and you're actually trying to add heat to it, right? So you're taking a baby bottle and putting it into hot water, and then you want it to actually gain heat. So that's more problematic. So therefore, the poskim say, and I think this is not such a difficult thing to do, is what you do is just make sure the top of the bottle is sticking out, like a portion of the bottle is sticking out a little bit out of the water, and then it's not considered Hatamana, it's not considered insulating because it's not fully covered, right? So that's that. And then again, just to reiterate a halacha that seems like many people aren't familiar with, is that we discussed the last couple of weeks that you are allowed to heat up liquids as long as it's heated up on something that cannot get the temperature of the liquids to 110 degrees, right? So like putting down on top of a crock pot, if you know that it's not going to get to 110 degrees, it's not a problem because 110 degrees, anything less than 110 degrees is considered cold. There are opinions, and the Mishnah Berurah says you can do this in a desperate situation, and others say you can do this always, that you can do Hatamana, you can insulate something that's less than 110 degrees, right? Obviously, you can't do it with something that's going to add heat because that's even before Shabbos. But let's say you realize that your soup is 110 degrees. How you would realize that on Shabbos, I don't know. But let's say you know for sure it's less than 110 degrees. Many opinions say you can now go wrap that whichever way you want, even if it's in the initial pot, because less than 110 degrees is considered cold, and there's no issue with cold. Now that I just said that, it reminds me something. So people ask, why is it not insulating to keep food in an oven, right? Why is that not insulating with something that's adding heat if the oven's on? The answer is because the pots in the oven don't go up against the walls. There's space in between your pots, usually a lot of space in between your pots and the walls, right? So therefore, that's why there's no insulation in ovens. Sometimes in caterers, warming ovens, from there, as far as I know, sometimes they could really stuff those top to bottom, side to side, with trays. In that case, that might be a problem. That might be a problem. But I think that's basically it. Okay, let me just see any more questions. Yes, again, so let me just review. Hatamana, just a quick synopsis. To insulate something from before Shabbos with something that will not add heat is allowed. Insulating with something that will not add heat on Shabbos is not allowed. Again, before Shabbos, something insulating something that won't add heat or just maintain heat is allowed. But you can't do that on Shabbos. Something that's going to add heat is also even before Shabbos, right? That's the basic rules. Now, yes, but you have to meet the four requirements in order for Hatamana to be asa. Right? If you don't meet the four requirements, if you even don't have one, then you're okay. Yes, and you would be able to do Hatamana even on Shabbos if you don't meet any of these four requirements, right? So that's basically it. Again, the four requirements are: it's got to be in the initial kli that it was cooked in. It has to be up against the wall. It has to be fully covered, and your intention has to be to insulate it. Those are the four. If you're missing any of those four, then you're allowed to do it on Shabbos. So can you insulate a challah on top of crock pot if it won't reach 110 degrees? You according to the opinion that we just said, yes, you would be allowed to. You would be allowed to insulate the challah on top of it, but the Mishnah Berurah doesn't like it unless you're desperate. So if you don't have to, then better not. But again, it would depend on why you're covering your challah. You can put the challah there and leave a space open, or what the eights is, what you can do is to take foil and just leave the top open a little bit. And you leave the top open, then you're going to be okay. Just a little warning: if you put challah on top of a crock pot without a foil, and that challah could potentially get to 110 degrees, then you have a problem that challah now will become fleishiks, right? Because the taste is going to go through the metal, the top, right? Basically, we'll use this here. This is heat. This top of the crock pot is hot, and then you put your challah down on top of it. This is fleishiks. This is like cooking a challah right on top of fleishiks, and that challah will now become fleishiks. Then you can't use that for dairy later on. And then there's also restriction on making meat bread. But if you're going to make sure you do it, eat that whole challah during that meal on Shabbos, then it's okay, right? Okay, let me just see. Let me try and get in to the chat here. Yeah. Okay, so that's okay. Now another question. You put the balls in the cholent. Trying to understand the question. Sorry. No, as long as the crock pot, by putting the balls into the cholent, that's going to raise the crock pot, and there's going to automatically be a space, even on the sides. There's going to be a space on the top, right here. There's also going to be a space on the side. So therefore, it's not going to be a problem. I hope that's clear. Also, somebody had asked last week or 2 weeks, both I think, and I didn't get to it, about the Mishkan. Like which malachas in the Mishkan. I don't remember exactly what the question was, but do we go with the malachas of the Mishkan, or the construction of the Mishkan, or is it also with the karbanos? That's a big disagreement amongst the Rishonim, whether we just go with things that were involved in the construction of the Mishkan, or also having to do with karbanos. It seems like we go with both, but that is a big disagreement in the Rishonim. Okay, I hope this was clear. Any questions? If anybody has my number, you can get through to me during the week, or and that's basically it. I thank everybody for listening. Be'ez Hashem, next week we'll discuss the most pertinent halachas, which is how to put the food back onto the fire. Yeah, so that's basically it. Okay, a good talk, everybody.